The twin suns of Erithos hung low over a barren wasteland streaked with jagged canyons and iridescent dust storms. The air was a harsh cocktail of grit and static, making every breath through the filtered mask feel like swallowing sandpaper. Sergeant Jack Harper adjusted the straps of his tactical vest, his every muscle coiled in anticipation. The mission was simple on paper: secure a remote energy relay vital to maintaining communications between Earth and its Galactic Federation allies. In practice, nothing about this cursed rock had ever been simple. Jack scanned the ridge ahead through his visor. The Galactic soldiers, towering, silver-skinned beings with elongated limbs and glowing blue eyes, moved with eerie precision. Their strides were unnaturally graceful, their faces devoid of emotion. Jack had spent the last year fighting alongside them, always feeling more like an afterthought than an equal partner. Today, that gnawing unease had grown into something sharper, more immediate. "You see how they're bunching up?" Corporal Jenkins murmured over the comms. "Looks like they're shielding something." "Or someone," Jack replied, keeping his voice low. His hand tightened around the grip of his rifle. "Stay sharp." The human team had been relegated to rear guard, as usual, a position that rankled Jack. The Galactic soldiers led every operation, their disdain for human frailty barely veiled. Jack knew the score. They considered humans primitive, a species barely worth their time. It didn't matter that humanity had bled and fought to hold the line against the Arcanid swarm when the Galactics had been on the brink of annihilation. They saw humans as cannon fodder, not comrades. Ahead, the Galactic commander, Corys, raised one spindly arm, signaling the column to halt. Jack frowned. There was no cover here, just open ground with the relay station's spire barely visible on the horizon. His instincts screamed that something was wrong. "Lieutenant," Jack called to the human officer at their rear. "Permission to advance and scout." Before the lieutenant could reply, Corys' voice crackled through the shared comms channel, smooth and cold. "No need, Sergeant. We have everything under control. Remain where you are." Jack's jaw tightened. He exchanged a glance with Jenkins, who shrugged uneasily. Orders were orders, but Jack had survived too many battles by trusting his gut. As the Galactics moved forward, their glowing eyes never once meeting the humans, Jack's sense of unease deepened into something like dread. The first explosion shattered the stillness. Jack hit the ground instinctively, rolling into a crouch as a second blast tore through the formation ahead. Dust and debris rained down, blinding and choking, and the sharp, alien whine of plasma fire filled the air. Shapes moved through the chaos. Arcanids, their chitinous exoskeletons gleaming like obsidian, swarmed from hidden burrows. "Contact!" Jack roared, raising his rifle and firing controlled bursts. The Arcanids were fast, their serrated limbs slicing through armor with sickening ease. Jack saw one Galactic soldier fall, its silver blood spattering the ground, but the rest held formation, firing back with mechanical precision. The humans weren't so lucky. The ambush had hit them hardest scattered and exposed. Jack's squad scrambled for cover, returning fire, but it was clear they were outnumbered and outgunned. "Corys!" Jack barked over the comms. "We need support." There was no reply. Jack spun, searching for the Galactics, but what he saw stopped him cold. They weren't fighting to protect the humans. They were withdrawing, their long strides carrying them away from the chaos. Jack's heart thundered in his chest as the truth hit him like a sledgehammer. "They're leaving us?" Jenkins shouted, his voice thick with disbelief and rage. Jack didn't have time to process the betrayal. An Arcanid lunged toward him, its mandibles snapping inches from his face. He fired point blank, the recoil jolting up his arms as the creature collapsed in a heap. Another Arcanid followed, then another. Jack fought with a desperate ferocity, his squad falling back toward a rocky outcrop. The ground erupted behind them, the blast hurling Jack into the dirt. His head spun, his ears ringing as pain lanced through his leg. He tried to push himself up, but his left leg wouldn't obey. Looking down, he saw blood soaking through his fatigues, the jagged edge of shrapnel embedded deep in his thigh. Sergeant. Jenkins was at his side, his face pale beneath the grime. We got to move. Jack gritted his teeth, dragging himself upright with Jenkins' help. The ridge offered scant cover, but it was better than nothing. As they reached it, Jack risked a glance back at the battlefield. The Galactics were gone, their figures mere specks on the horizon. But not before Corey's turned, his glowing eyes locking onto Jack. His mouth curved into something resembling a smile. They hadn't just abandoned them. They'd planned this. Jack's vision blurred with pain and fury, but he forced himself to stay alert. His squad was down to half strength, their faces etched with the same grim realization. They had been betrayed, left as bait to thin out the Arcanids. The Arcanids circled, their numbers thinning but still formidable. Jack steadied his rifle, ignoring the agony in his leg. The thought of giving up never crossed his mind, not while his men still stood. Then came the sound he least expected, laughter. It echoed across the battlefield, high and mocking. Jack's head snapped toward the source. On a nearby rise, a group of Galactics had stopped to watch, their amusement evident even from a distance. One of them raised a hand in a mock salute before turning away. The laughter burned hotter than the pain. Jack's grip tightened on his weapon. Let them laugh. Let them mock. If they thought he would die here, they were sorely mistaken. You good, Sarge? Jenkins asked, his voice tight with worry. Jack met his gaze, his expression hard as iron. We're not done yet. With that, he turned back to the fight, his rifle spitting fire. If this was humanity's end, Jack Harper would make sure it was one the galaxy would never forget. Jack Harper dragged himself across the desolate terrain, every inch of movement a battle against agony. His leg throbbed with each heartbeat, the jagged shrapnel still lodged deep in the muscle. The makeshift bandage he'd tied around the wound was already soaked through, but stopping wasn't an option. The Arcanids were gone, scattered or killed, but the Galactic's laughter still echoed in his mind, a cruel refrain that pushed him forward. The horizon stretched endlessly, barren and unforgiving, with no sign of shelter. Jack's breathing was labored, his strength waning, but he forced himself to focus. He'd survived worse. Afghanistan, the Arcanid siege on Europa. He clung to those memories like talismans, reminders of the grit that had carried him through. No alien betrayal would break him now. He scanned the horizon again, his visor's cracked display flickering with faint readings. A small spike in energy registered to the east, a faint but promising sign. It could be a relay beacon, an abandoned outpost, or a trap. Jack didn't care. Whatever it was better than bleeding out in the dirt. Time blurred as he crawled, stumbled, and limped his way toward the signal. The twin suns began their slow descent, bathing the land in a burnt orange glow. Jack's mouth was dry, his water supply long gone, but he pushed aside the thirst and exhaustion. Survival came first. One step at a time, the outpost emerged from the haze as a jagged silhouette, its edges warped by heat waves. As Jack approached, he saw it was more ruin than refuge. The structure had been partially buried by sandstorms, its walls cracked and pockmarked. Still, it was shelter, and it was enough. Jack forced the rusted door open, his muscles screaming in protest. Inside, the air was stale but cooler, a welcome relief. The interior was a jumble of alien machinery, consoles coated in dust, and faintly glowing panels that hummed with residual energy. Jack scanned the room, his eyes locking onto a cylindrical device mounted on the far wall. Medical supplies. He could hardly believe his luck. He hobbled toward it, collapsing onto the floor as his leg finally gave out. Blood pooled beneath him, dark and viscous. He gritted his teeth and yanked the shrapnel free with a guttural growl, his vision swimming. The pain was blinding, but he pressed on, fumbling with the alien controls. The device hissed to life, a needle extending from its base. Without hesitation, Jack jabbed it into his thigh. A searing heat coursed through him, making his muscles spasm, but the bleeding stopped, and the pain dulled to a manageable ache. Leaning against the wall, Jack exhaled shakily. The Galactics might have betrayed him, but their tech was still a miracle. As his head cleared, he began to take stock of the outpost. Most of the equipment seemed operational, though its purpose was unclear. He accessed the console nearest to him, its interface flashing alien symbols that he'd learned to decipher during his training. What he found made his stomach turn. Schematics, troop movements, and coded transmissions filled the screen, detailing the Galactic's operations in the sector. It wasn't just humans they'd betrayed. Several allied species had been left to fend for themselves in similar ambushes. The Galactics weren't simply arrogant. They were orchestrating a calculated campaign to consolidate power, eliminating potential threats under the guise of cooperation. Jack's jaw tightened as he pieced it together. The mission on Arithos hadn't been about securing a relay. It had been a trap designed to cripple the human forces and send a clear message. Humanity was expendable. Anger roared through him, sharp and unrelenting. He slammed his fist against the console, the dull thud reverberating in the silent room. They thought they'd left him to die here, broken and forgotten. They'd made a mistake. He spent hours scavenging the outpost, gathering supplies and studying the Galactic's technology. His leg was healing rapidly, thanks to the medtech, but his strength hadn't fully returned. Still, he found himself invigorated, his mind racing with plans. He couldn't bring back his squad, but he could make sure their deaths weren't in vain. He would show the Galactics what humans were capable of. Among the scattered equipment, Jack discovered something extraordinary. A suit of experimental armor, sleek and angular, its surface etched with glowing circuits. It was unlike anything he'd seen before, a hybrid of galactic design and something older, more primal. The suit pulsed faintly, as if alive, and Jack felt a strange pull as he approached it. He hesitated, then placed his hand on its chest plate. The armor came alive, enveloping him in a seamless cocoon of metal and light. Data flooded his visor, streams of information about the suit's capabilities, enhanced strength, reflexes, and integrated weaponry. It was a marvel, a tool of destruction designed for a warrior far more advanced than any human. And now it was his. Jack tested the suit systems, his movements fluid and precise. His injuries felt like a distant memory, the pain replaced by a simmering resolve. He was no longer just a soldier. He was something more, something the Galactics wouldn't see coming. As the suns dipped below the horizon, casting the outpost in shadow, Jack stood at the doorway, his silhouette framed by the faint glow of his armor. He gazed out at the wasteland, the bitterness of betrayal now a smoldering determination. The Galactics thought they'd rid themselves of a liability, a primitive species unworthy of respect. They had underestimated humanity's will to survive, to adapt, to fight back. Jack activated the suit's comm system, linking to the galactic network. His voice, steady and cold, carried into the void. "Corys, you wanted to see what a human could do? You'll find out soon enough." The transmission ended, leaving only silence. Jack turned away, his mind already on the next step. The Galactics had started this fight, but he would finish it. One step at a time. The suit hummed as Jack moved through the ruins of the outpost, each step more sure than the last. His leg, though still tender, no longer hindered him. His senses were sharper, heightened in ways he hadn't believed possible. The armor fit like a second skin, responsive and alive, as if it had been designed with him in mind. He flexed his fingers, testing the power that surged through his veins with each motion. His body felt transformed. The thought of his squad, fallen and forgotten by their supposed allies, tightened his chest. Their deaths had not been in vain. He would see to that. The Galactics had made one fatal mistake. They had underestimated the will of a human soldier. They had thought him weak, just another disposable grunt to be discarded in the name of their so-called superior strategy. Now, Jack was something more than they could ever have predicted, something they would regret. Jack had spent the last few hours gathering supplies and analyzing the equipment he'd scavenged. The suit's internal systems were connected to a vast network of galactic resources. He accessed one of the terminals in the outpost and pulled up the locations of the nearest galactic bases, tracking the movements of the soldiers who had left him to die. Corys, the cold, calculating commander, was stationed at a base just a few clicks to the south. The other Galactics were scattered in various positions, still unaware of the storm that was about to hit them. Jack didn't waste time. He loaded his new weapons, a hybrid of human and galactic tech, into the suit's storage compartments. His visor adjusted to the low light as he set a course for Corey's base. It would be a long journey, days, if he traveled on foot, but now there was no hurry. His every muscle screamed for vengeance, but he knew the value of patience. He had to be precise. The journey across the desert was grueling, the terrain unforgiving. But with the suit's enhanced abilities, the fatigue was lessened. The power that surged through him turned each obstacle into something small and insignificant. Sandstorms that had once seemed terrifying now felt like nothing more than a nuisance. The terrain, hostile and alien, became a puzzle for him to solve, rather than a barrier. His mind remained sharp, calculating the most efficient path, while his body flowed with newfound strength. At night, he slept fitfully, his dreams haunted by the faces of his fallen squad mates. Their voices whispered in the dark, urging him to keep going. He owed them this. Every step he took, every breath, was a tribute to their sacrifice. By the fourth day, Jack had crossed into Galactic-controlled territory. His sensors flared with warnings. He had crossed into the perimeter of Corey's base. He studied the area carefully, noting the patrols and defensive systems in place. The base was heavily fortified, with towering walls and an array of automated weaponry designed to deter any attack. But it was nothing he couldn't handle. Jack studied the layout of the base, his mind working in overdrive. He had no intention of going in guns blazing. He needed to strike swiftly to send a message, not just to Corey's, but to the entire Galactic Federation. Humanity was no longer their subordinate. They had taken the first strike, and now it was his turn. The base loomed ahead as Jack approached under the cover of night. His helmet's targeting systems highlighted weak points in the perimeter's defenses. The walls weren't as impenetrable as they appeared. There were gaps in the automated patrols, blind spots where Jack could slip through undetected. His pulse quickened, but he remained calm. The training kicked in, the countless hours of drills, of learning how to be invisible in plain sight, of mastering tactics that would keep him alive when everything seemed lost. He waited for the signal, a brief lull in the patrols, and then, like a shadow, he slipped through the gap, his movements fluid and precise. The base's alarms never had a chance to sound as he disabled the outer defenses with the suit's integrated EMP pulse. The soldiers inside would be caught completely off guard. By the time they realized something was wrong, Jack would already be inside, already making them pay for their arrogance. The base's interior was a labyrinth of cold steel corridors and flickering lights. Jack moved with purpose, every step calculated, every turn deliberate. His visor fed him information, feeding his mind with the layout of the base, the number of guards, and the location of key command centers. Corey's quarters were at the heart of the complex, surrounded by layers of security. Jack smiled to himself. The harder they made it, the sweeter the victory would be. He encountered a few soldiers along the way, but they didn't even see him coming. With the suit's enhanced strength and reflexes, he dispatched them silently, leaving their bodies slumped in darkened corners. He didn't hesitate, didn't waste time. Each soldier was a necessary sacrifice, a piece on the chessboard that would eventually lead him to Corey's. Jack's heart pounded with anticipation as he neared the central command room. The door loomed ahead, a sleek, reinforced barrier that seemed to mock him. He stepped forward, activating the suit's cloaking device, and within moments, the door slid open with a soft hiss. Inside, Corey stood before a large holographic display, his back to the door, unaware of the danger. For a moment, Jack simply watched, taking in the scene. Corey's was tall, his silver skin reflecting the eerie light of the holograms. His eyes, glowing a soft blue, were fixed on the data before him, a picture of calm authority. He hadn't yet sensed Jack's presence, but Jack had sensed something else, something more important. It was time. With a single motion, Jack deactivated the cloak and stepped into the room, his voice cutting through the silence. "You thought you could leave me to die, Corey's?" Corey's head snapped around, his eyes widening in shock. His hand shot to his side, But it was too late. Jack was already there, his fist connecting with the Galactic Commander's chest with a force that sent Corey's sprawling backward. "Humanity's not as weak as you thought," Jack growled, stepping over the fallen commander. Corey struggled to rise, his breath ragged. "You're nothing but an anomaly. We will wipe you out like all the others." Jack smiled, his voice dripping with contempt. "You're about to learn just how wrong you are." The battle had only just begun. The base's central chamber hummed with tension as Jack stood over Corey's, his breath steady, his pulse pounding. The Galactic Commander, still struggling to regain his footing, seemed momentarily stunned by the sheer audacity of Jack's attack. His eyes, glowing faintly with the same blue luminescence that marked his kind, narrowed in disbelief. For a moment, they simply stared at one another, locked in a silent contest of wills. "You think you've won?" Corey's voice was smooth, unshaken by the earlier chaos, though there was a subtle flicker of fear beneath the calm. "You're nothing but an insect, a pitiful speck in the grand design of the universe. You were always expendable, Harper." Jack's lips curled into a thin smile, the words failing to elicit the anger they once might have. Instead, there was only a quiet satisfaction. He could feel the armor systems, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat, a reminder of just how far he'd come since that moment on Erithos, when the Galactics had abandoned him. They hadn't killed him, not fully. No, they had only made him stronger. "I'm no insect," Jack replied, his voice cold and steady. "And you're about to find out just how wrong you were." Corey's finally managed to get his footing, pushing himself off the cold, metallic floor. His long limbs were unscathed, though his posture was tense, and his glowing eyes fixed on Jack with renewed calculation. There was no panic, no sign of weakness. Only the sharp, analytical mind of a seasoned warrior who understood the magnitude of his mistake. Without warning, Corey's hand moved, drawing a weapon from his side, a sleek, silver blade that shimmered in the dim light. It was a weapon far beyond the reach of human technology, its edge glowing with the strange energy that the Galactics wielded in their most advanced tools. Jack's instincts screamed as the blade whistled through the air, striking with inhuman speed. But Jack was faster. He sidestepped with ease, his armor adapting, guiding his movements with an uncanny precision. The blade missed by mere inches, its energy humming dangerously as it cleaved through the space Jack had occupied a heartbeat earlier. Jack wasted no time. With a swift motion, he grabbed Corey's wrist, the suit amplifying his strength as he twisted, forcing the Galactic to drop the blade with a sharp cry of pain. Corey staggered back, his eyes burning with fury now. "You don't understand," he spat, breathing heavily. "You never will. The universe is not a place for weaklings like you. We are the future. We are the order, the purpose. You are nothing." Jack stood his ground, unmoved by the words. He could see the arrogance in Corey's eyes, the belief that his race was destined for dominion over the stars. It was a belief that had driven them to discard entire species without a second thought. It was a belief that had led to the deaths of Jack's squad mates and countless others. And now it was a belief that would be shattered. "No," Jack said simply. "You're wrong." The sound of a door opening behind them caught both of their attention. A squad of Galactic soldiers entered the room, drawn by the commotion. There were at least 5 of them, each clad in the same silver armor, their glowing eyes betraying nothing. They hadn't expected Jack to be alive, let alone standing in the heart of their base, engage in a direct confrontation with Corey's. For a brief moment, there was silence. Then one of the soldiers raised a weapon, aiming it directly at Jack. He didn't flinch. Before the soldier could fire, Jack moved. His suit's enhanced speed and strength kicked in, propelling him forward in a blur. He ducked under the blast of plasma fire, closing the distance between him and the soldiers in a single, fluid motion. With a swift, brutal movement, Jack disabled the first soldier, knocking the weapon from his hand and sending him crashing into the wall. The others hesitated for only a split second, unsure of how to respond to the human who seemed to be everywhere at once. Every move calculated, every strike precise. But that hesitation was all Jack needed. He took them down one by one, the the suit amplifying his every action. He slammed one soldier into the floor with a punch that reverberated through the base. Another soldier tried to fire, but Jack disarmed him with a quick twist of his wrist, the plasma rifle flying from the Galactic's grip. The final soldier attempted to flee, but Jack was already on top of him, pinning him against the wall with one hand while the other held a blade to his throat. "Tell your commander," Jack growled, "that the human you thought you killed is coming for all of you. And I'm not alone." The soldier's eyes widened in terror, and Jack could see the doubt begin to creep in. He knew the Galactics had underestimated humanity in ways they could never comprehend. They believed themselves to be gods, rulers of the stars. But they were wrong. They were about to learn the true power of a species that had only just begun to fight back. With a final, forceful shove, Jack sent the soldier crashing to the floor. The base was silent once more. Corey's watched it all unfold, his expression unreadable. He had never expected a human to fight back in such a manner. He had never imagined that someone like Jack Harper, an insignificant human soldier, would be capable of bringing down a squad of Galactics with ease. "You think this will change anything?" Corey's voice was low, controlled. "You are still nothing but a blip in the timeline. You're playing at a game you don't understand." Jack wiped the sweat from his brow, his hand still resting on the handle of his weapon. "Maybe, but I know this. You can't stop us. Not now. Not ever." Corey's lips curled into a thin smile, though there was no humor in it. "Perhaps not, but you will die trying." The fight was far from over. But Jack knew one thing with certainty. This was just the beginning. The Galactics had awakened something in humanity, a resolve, a fire that would burn until the stars themselves were consumed by it. And they would regret underestimating that fire. Without another word, Jack turned and left the room, the hum of the suit's energy systems ringing in his ears. There was more to do, more to take down. The battle had only just begun. The base was in chaos, alarms blaring as Jack moved swiftly through the labyrinth of corridors. He could hear the frantic voices of the Galactic soldiers over the comm system, their voices laced with panic as they scrambled to respond to his sudden, calculated assault. The disarray was a testament to their arrogance. Just moments ago, they had believed themselves invincible. Now, their entire base was at risk because of one human soldier who had refused to die. Jack's steps were measured, deliberate. He had done the impossible. He'd taken down Corey's personal guard without breaking a sweat, leaving their bodies strewn like broken dolls in the hallway. The commander, though not out of the fight yet, was clearly rattled. Jack could sense the shift in the air, the tension palpable. He could feel Corey's eyes on him, always calculating, always scheming. But Jack wasn't just a soldier anymore. He had become something else. He had become a symbol. He paused briefly, adjusting the weaponry stored in the suit's compartments. The hybrid tech he had scavenged from the outpost felt like an extension of himself now, each pulse of the suit's energy syncing perfectly with his own heartbeat. His mission was clear. Corey's needed to fall, and with him, the illusion of galactic superiority. But Jack also knew there was more at stake than one commander's defeat. The Galactic's power extended far beyond this base, and the more destruction he caused here, the more he would expose the cracks in their empire. The rebellion had begun. As Jack rounded a corner, he was met by another squad of soldiers, their faces hidden behind the smooth, reflective visors of their helmets. But even through the faceless armor, Jack could feel the hesitation radiating off them. They had seen the devastation he had wrought, the brutal efficiency with which he had taken down their comrades. They knew the fight was no longer a simple task of defending the base. It was survival. The soldiers didn't move at first. They stood in the narrow hallway, weapons drawn, uncertainty hanging heavy in the air. Jack's fingers twitched toward his own sidearm, but he paused. This wasn't about simply killing more of them. He had a message to send. "Step aside," he ordered, his voice cool and commanding, filtered through the suit's comm system. "This doesn't concern you." One of the soldiers, a young man by the sound of his voice, hesitated. "You're just one human," he said, his words shaking with doubt. "We're trained to eliminate threats like you. Don't make this harder than it has to be." Jack's lips quirked into a faint smile. He could hear the fear, the uncertainty creeping into the soldier's tone. It was the same thing Corey's had failed to grasp. Humans weren't just weak creatures to be wiped out. They were capable of adaptation, of evolving into something unpredictable, something the Galactics couldn't understand. "I'm not just one human," Jack said, his tone quiet, but carrying with the weight of conviction. "I'm the beginning of something bigger. You've already lost." The soldiers exchanged uncertain glances, their hesitation growing. The young one's grip tightened on his weapon, but the others seemed less sure. They had seen the destruction Jack had wrought, and somewhere, deep down, they knew the truth. The Galactics had underestimated humanity, and now they were paying the price. Jack took a step forward, his boots echoing in the silent hallway. He wasn't here to slaughter them. He was here to show them that they had no place in the universe, not anymore. The soldier at the front wavered, and with a shaky breath, he lowered his weapon. The others followed suit, their posture uncertain but submissive. Jack nodded, acknowledging their decision, before moving past them without another word. He didn't need to waste any more time on them. They had made their choice. They knew the price of defiance now. As he continued deeper into the base, Jack's mind raced with possibilities. The Galactics had dismissed humanity as a non-threat, a species unworthy of respect, let alone fear. They had underestimated the core of humanity's resolve, its ability to fight, to adapt, to survive against overwhelming odds. And now, as he closed in on Corey's inner sanctum, Jack realized that the true battle had just begun. He would have to dismantle the belief that the Galactics were invincible, one victory at a time. The doors to the inner command center slid open with a soft hiss, and Jack stepped into the heart of the base. Corey stood at the far end of the room, his back to Jack, his posture rigid with controlled anger. The Galactic commander's normally calm demeanor was gone, replaced by a quiet fury that simmered beneath the surface. Jack could see the faint tremor in his hands as he activated a hollow interface, his fingers moving rapidly across the glowing panels. "You should have stayed dead, Harper," Corey said without turning around, his voice low but filled with venom. "But now you've sealed your fate. You've forced me to end this, once and for all." Jack's gaze narrowed as he advanced. "You're not going to win this, Corey's. You can't wipe out humanity like you've done with every other species. Not this time." Corey's turned then, his piercing blue eyes locking with Jack's. A cold smile crept across the commander's face. "You still don't understand, do you? This is bigger than you. Bigger than your pitiful species. I've seen your kind crumble before. What makes you think you'll be any different?" Jack's hand instinctively reached for his sidearm. The air between them crackled with tension, the weight of their conflict heavy in the space. "Because we're not like the others," Jack said, his voice firm, unwavering. "We never have been." Corey's eyes flickered briefly, a flash of doubt before the cold mask of superiority returned. Without warning, he raised his hand, signaling the activation of a series of energy shields that surrounded him. Jack's pulse quickened. He had known the confrontation would come to this, but now it was time to end it. "Then come and prove it," Corey sneered, his voice almost a taunt. Jack didn't hesitate. His pulse, steady and rhythmic, echoed the sound of his every movement. The time for words had passed. It was time to fight, to finish this. The room was a fortress of silence, the air thick with anticipation. Corey stood in the center, his body surrounded by the shimmering energy shields, his expression unreadable, though the fury in his eyes betrayed his inner turmoil. Jack could feel the tension radiating from the Galactic commander, the weight of his belief in the invincibility of his race. But Jack wasn't intimidated. Not anymore. His suit hummed with power, and he knew he had only one option, to end this once and for all. "Your shields won't protect you forever, Corey's," Jack said, his voice cutting through the thick air like a blade. "You can hide behind all the technology you want, but it won't change the fact that you're on the losing side." Corey's lips curled into a sneer, the arrogance of the Galactic race evident in the tilt of his head. "You're delusional if you think you can defeat me. You're just a human, weak, fragile, and destined to fail." Jack's fists clenched at his sides. The words stung, but only because they echoed the lies he had once believed. The Galactics had conditioned humanity to think of themselves as inferior, expendable. But now, standing in the heart of the enemy's base, surrounded by their most advanced technology, Jack had seen the truth. Humanity wasn't weak. Humanity had the power to rise, to defy, to fight back. "You're wrong," Jack said, the words steady, unwavering. "You've never understood us. You never will." With a sudden motion, Jack activated the suit's thrusters, propelling himself forward with a speed that took Corey's by surprise. The energy shields flared in an attempt to block his path, but Jack had already anticipated the move. He twisted in midair, his body contorting with the grace of a seasoned fighter, and landed behind Corey's, his movements swift and fluid. Corey spun around, raising his hand to launch a devastating blast from his gauntlet. But Jack was faster. He drew a pulse blade from the side of his armor and swung it in a wide arc, striking the gauntlet with a resounding crack. The weapon's energy flickered and sputtered, temporarily disabled. Corey's eyes widened in shock. "Impressive," Corey said, but there was a hint of desperation in his voice now. He wasn't used to being outmatched, and it showed. "But it won't matter. You'll fall just like the rest of your kind. Your technology is nothing compared to the might of the Galactic Empire." Jack's eyes never wavered from Corey's face. He could see the fear now, lurking beneath the commander's cold exterior. Corey's wasn't invincible. He was just another being, flawed and vulnerable. Jack had faced worse than this. He had survived the impossible, and now he would make sure the Galactics understood that. "You're not the future," Jack said, his voice firm. "You're a relic, and you're about to become history." With that, Jack launched himself forward again, his pulse blade raised. Corey's reacted with lightning speed, activating another shield around himself. But this time, Jack had a different plan. He reached into his suit's arsenal, pulling out a disruptor grenade, a weapon designed to destabilize energy shields. The device pulsed with blue light, ready to discharge. "Goodbye, Corey's," Jack said, his tone cold and final. He tossed the grenade with precision, the device landing just feet from the commander. Corey's eyes widened in realization, but before he could react, the grenade erupted with a sharp crackle of energy. The shield flickered, then shattered, its protective barrier collapsing in on itself. Corey staggered back, his armor sparking from the disruption. Jack didn't hesitate. With a single, powerful motion, he lunged forward, his pulse blade cutting through the air like lightning. It struck Corey's armor with a resounding clang, the force behind the blow knocking the commander to the ground. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of Corey's ragged breaths, the soft hum of Jack's suit, and the distant alarms ringing through the base. Corey struggled to rise, his face contorted in pain, but Jack stood over him, unwavering. He could feel the weight of the moment, the culmination of everything that had led to this point. The fall of the Galactic Empire wasn't a matter of technology or weaponry. It was a matter of will. The Galactics had believed themselves untouchable, but Jack had shown them the truth. They were just like any other empire, fragile, arrogant, and destined to fall. "Please," Corey's gasped, his voice barely a whisper. "You don't understand. We are the future. You can't stop us. We're too powerful. Too. Jack's gaze softened, but only for a moment. "You had your chance," he said, his voice steady, "and you wasted it." With that, Jack raised his pulse blade once more, the tip aimed directly at Corey's chest. The commander's eyes went wide with terror, but it was too late. Jack's resolve was unshakable. The Galactics had taken too much from humanity, and now it was time to make them pay. The blade pierced through Corey's armor with ease, ending the commander's reign in an instant. The room was silent once more, the weight of the moment settling over Jack like a cloak. He stood over Corey's lifeless body, the energy in his suit still humming with power. There was no triumph in his heart, only a cold sense of finality. This wasn't about victory for him. It was about survival. Humanity had been given a chance to prove itself, and Jack had made sure they wouldn't squander it. But as he looked around the room, Jack knew that this battle was far from over. Corey's was only one commander, and the Galactic Empire stretched across the stars. There were more enemies to face, more challenges to overcome. But now, humanity had a foothold. Now, the Galactics would learn that they were no longer the rulers of the universe. Jack had set the wheels in motion. The tide had turned, and it was only a matter of time before the rest of the galaxy felt the wrath of the human spirit. And Jack Harper, once an ordinary soldier, had become the symbol of that spirit.